This video is for collectors wanting to print or order prints of the artwork that they own, and for artists wanting to print and maybe even sell their work. We're going to cover framing briefly, print sizes, paper types, and then finding a print shop for you to print in. I'm not going to go too deeply into framing other than to say that the frame can cost more than the print, which takes people by surprise sometimes. You can buy a print for $50 and then spend $100 on framing it. But also, I believe you should be thinking about the frame before you even consider ordering a print or getting one printed. I'll explain. When people think about getting a print made, they often don't know what size they want to get it, and they think that the bigger is better, which is fine. And then they start with a print, and then they have to buy a frame, and then finally, where are they going to put it? It's a kind of an inside-out approach. And I strongly suggest the other way around, where you decide where it's going to go, so how big the frame is going to be, and then you have a mat, and then a border, and then what's left is the print size. So let me show you in the other room. Say, for example, I want a picture up here above the fireplace, and I want it to fill like the whole thing there. Let's measure it. I want the space to be about 34 inches, seems reasonable. That's like 87 centimeters. So if I just pop a picture up here now, by the magic of YouTube, so this is the picture that is ultimately going to go here. So if we're starting from the outside in, now I know I want 34 inches, and this frame is quite a narrow one, it's half an inch on each side, so that's an inch off and down to 33 inches. Now the mat size here is 2 inches on both sides, so I'm going to subtract another 4 inches, taking me down to 29 inches. And then finally I've got a border around here about half an inch, just over a centimetre on each side, so that's another inch off. So I've gone from 34 inches down to 33 inches, down to 29 inches, down to 28 inches. I know my print needs to be 28 inches wide. Let's go back. The other thing you may want to do is buy an off-the-shelf frame like this one down here. This is a 20 by 16 or a 16 by 12 or an 8 by 6 because of the different mats. And then you just print whatever you want to fill whatever space is remaining. Just try to get ones that have glass and not plastic. If you're going to the framers, then generally just trust them. They've done it loads of times before, and certainly more than me. So now you know roughly what size you want to print something at. You have to find out if you actually can. So on to print sizes. This is 1 meter high. That's a 1 meter print. Also 1 meter, but it's also 32 inches by 40 inches, 24 by 30 inches, 16 by 20 inches, 8 by 10 inches. All of these are 4 by 5 ratio, which is a standard print size for photography. So if your art is 4 by 5 in ratio, then it's easy to find a frame for. And then same again with squares. If you do a square, easy to find square frames for. The general rule for maximum print quality is you're aiming for 300 dpi, which stands for dots per inch. And for our purposes, that's the same as saying 300 pixels per inch, which is roughly 120 pixels in centimeters. We're going to be switching back and forth quite a bit between centimeters and inches. Sorry about that, print is often done in inches. In the case of my 28-inch 70s pop print from before in the other room, that would be 28 inches times 300 pixels, which is 8,400 pixels by 8,400 pixels. A 1 meter print would be, well, 120 pixels times 100 centimeters, which is 12,000 pixels. Some of those numbers are pretty high, they're quite large. From a technical side, with our type of art, which is generative art created on a canvas object on a web page, they generally max out at around 8,192 pixels as a square, because after that then things start to crash, which isn't quite enough for a 1 meter print at 300 dpi. You can push it and get away with 200 pixels per inch, and I'll show you one of those in a moment, and that's around 80 pixels per centimeter. This large print here and this other one have both been printed at 200 dpi, and they seem to be absolutely fine. And I think you can get away with it more on textured paper because the ink sort of soaks in and spreads just a little bit and hides those sharp, jaggy pixels. Anything less than that, like 150 dpi, you start to get this pixelation. So if you're really brave, you could go down to that, but I'd avoid it if you can. To recap, you want between 200 and 300 pixels per inch. So if you know the size that you want, like 18 inches, multiply by 2 or 300 to get the pixels you need. If you have the image, then divide the number of pixels across and down by either 200 or 300 to get the size of print that you can print up to. If you're thinking about buying a piece of digital art or generative art with printing in mind, it's worth checking out that it actually generates at a high enough resolution for the size that you want to print it at, or if the artist supplies a higher resolution on their own website. So now onto the paper after this one quick trick. So here's a quick tip for generative art that appears on like art blocks and FX Hash. It possibly won't work for other artwork that's just supplied as a JPEG because you've got your fixed size. But with generative art, that's generally designed to fill the space that's available for it, which is why this works. When you're looking at projects or you're thinking about buying into a project for something that you maybe want to print, it's worth looking to see if the artist supplies that to you. So if we click on this one here, for example, we can see we've got a press S to save the PNG. If we pick another one, let's have a look at Soul's Asylum because that's tall. Right, there isn't any instructions on the left for how to save that image. So if we just open it up here on the right hand side and save the image, let's go into the downloads and look at that image, we can now see that that is 946 pixels high, which at 300 dpi is about 3.5 inches. At a more risky 200 dpi is about 5 inches high. So that's not very big at all. If we do this instead and you go to view, zoom out, which is this, or I keep doing it, or I use this control here to go all the way down to 25%, this is now resized to fill the space available, which originally it was like this, so now it's a lot bigger. Let's save it. There we go. Now look at the size of it. This one is now 3,556 pixels high. So if we just do the maths, that's 3,556 divided by 300, about 12 inches high. 18 inches if we go for 200, or in centimeters, that's about 30 centimeters or 44 centimeters or 80 dots per centimeter. So that's pretty good. But we can do even better if you have access to a 4K monitor, and we'll just drag this up to the monitor here, this and this. Now we're up here, this is a 4K monitor. If I make this go absolutely full screen, and then I might need to refresh the page, and then save image as, this is going to take a lot longer because this file is now a lot bigger. So again, the trick is here, to open the image up in a browser, scale it down to 25%, zoom out, zoom out, zoom out, and then save the image. If we do this here, we can now see our final one is 8,640 pixels high, which is 8640 divided by 300 dpi, 29 inches, or riskier 200 dpi, 43 inches, or in centimeters, 120 centimeters per inch, that's 72 centimeters, or 108, just over a meter. So we've gone from being able to print something out at 5 inches to now over a meter in height. So that's pretty good. So if you're really stuck, it's worth maybe doing this trick of trying to zoom out. Back to the table. Right, all about paper, and then we're nearly done. Hooray. First thing you want to do is you want to pick a type of paper that kind of suits the design that you're going to print onto it. The most common printing technology we have, which is the inkjet, which we'll also call giclée printing, Clay printing, I think that's right. Some people don't like that word, they don't think it's like a real thing, and they would rather call it archival printing or archival art printing. It doesn't really matter, it basically means we're aiming to use light-fast, fade-resistant archival ink on acid-free paper in one of those big fancy printers. Those prints should survive 80 to 100 years without fading, some up to 200. It'll certainly outlast you or me, which is a nice thought. Going down the inkjet route, the other type is called C-type, and we're not going to cover that in this video. So once you've chosen that you're going to go inkjet, the next choice is if you're going to go for rough or smooth paper. It can be a bit overwhelming, think you need to pick the right paper, and I'll suggest my favourites in just a bit. So here's a couple of things that might help. First, you want paper that's over 280 GSM. Don't worry about that. Good paper and printers will tell you what the GSM is, and you want over 280. That is just the rule. Second, very broadly, there are two types of generative art. The first leans into using print-like textures, often simulating noise and paper textures. That's partly because on a smooth, bright screen, our brain is surprised and delighted by the roughness in the images, and those type of artworks tend to do really well. But printing a simulated paper texture on top of actual paper texture can be a little bit weird and sometimes look wrong. So if there's a lot of texture in the image, I would tend towards the smoother paper. The opposite is true. The other style of gen art, broadly speaking, leans into the digital. Why try emulating traditional print when you can play to the strengths of the digital medium, doing things that paper and paint and canvas can't do? In that case, printing onto a heavily textured paper gives our brains the same surprise and delight. We aren't used to seeing solid, strong blocks of colour and gradients on traditional rough paper. So, textured design, smooth paper so they don't fight, and then smooth designs on textured paper. Good rule of thumb. What do I use or recommend? Well, highly textured paper looks absolutely amazing. So stuff like this Ilford cotton textured, or the Hahnemühle German etching, if I pronounce that right. But these are really easy to damage and mark, and you have to be super careful with them. So if you're getting it framed, then don't even open the print when it arrives to take a look at it. Take it straight to the framers and get them to deal with it. Ask them to check for any faults with those papers, these papers, and other cotton-based ones. Sometimes they can get loose fibres on the surface that get printed on, and then those fibres drop off, leaving behind like a little white mark. I'll show you this on a print. Let me just go get one. It's just here. It's very small, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. So I had to ask them to reprint this whole thing just because of that one little bit of fibre. So if there are large, solid areas of colour, then maybe steer away from the really rough paper. If your artwork is more like a painting, so Mid-Journey AI type stuff, then you probably won't notice the odd little speck in the middle of all that busyness. But on a solid block of colour, you certainly do. I use and favour the Hahnemühle Photorag. You still have to be careful, obviously, but I find it a lot more robust. I haven't received a bad print from it yet, and it's got this nice subtle texture to it. For a smooth paper with the tiniest hint of a texture, I use the Hahnemühle Pearl that's got a little bit of reflection on it, but it looks great for these bold digital designs, and it's ever so slightly shiny rather than matte, but not too much, so it looks great behind glass as well. Last bit, you're doing really well. You know the size, and you have the file, and you've got a good idea of the type of paper that you want to use. Now you have to find somewhere to print for you. This is my suggestion. Try and find somewhere local you can easily walk to or drive to so you can look at the prints. If that's not an option, which it isn't for lots of people, try to find somewhere in the same state, country, geographic region. If that fails, then the same country, and if that fails altogether, I'll tell you that my printer that I use, who ship globally, as a last resort. So These may sound like stupid questions, but these are the questions you want to ask. 1. Ask if they do archival JK prints. They should know what that means. 2. Ask if they have any of these papers: Canston Aquila Rag, Ilford Cotton Texture, or Hahnemühle Photorag or German etching paper. 3. Ask how many ink cartridges their printer uses. You're looking for around 7 plus, ideally 10 or 11. We don't just want your standard cyan, yellow, magenta, black. We want the other colours, like special colours that they can use, or the shades in between. And if they roll their eyes at you, just tell them you're told to ask these questions. If the answer is yes to all 3 of those, then you found yourself a printing service. It's also worth seeing or asking if they have any sample packs of the prints and paper that you can buy. Often they'll be happy to send them to you, and that'll make things even easier for you. If you're really stuck, then you can use the print studio that I use. I'm in the UK, where they have a printer. But because of stupid Brexit, they've also set up a studio in Germany where they can ship to Europe and worldwide, as well as in the US they've got printers there, so basically everywhere. They're called the Print Space, and that works with the .co.uk and also a .com. And if you're in the US, then I think you get free shipping throughout the US. This isn't sponsored or affiliated, but I think you can use my code to get a discount on your first order, and I'll include that code below and here probably. Color settings. This is a really quick. There's all sorts of things about color profiles you can use, and downloading the right profile for the printer and so on. I'm sure that's all great and probably important for portraits to get good skin tones. But for generative art, I've never bothered. It's always looked fine. And I think we're done. One final thought. I've talked a lot about quality printing, but the most important thing to me is that you surround yourself with art that makes you happy or challenges you. You don't need a frame, you don't need archival ink and archival paper. Just print it out on whatever printer you can get your hands on, and then just stick it up on the wall. Buy a cheap frame if you want to. Generative art is great when it's on your screen, or it's on your phone, or it's on your watch, like it's a screensaver or the lock screen, even a digital screen up on the wall, I guess VR even, but it hits differently when it's physically there. When you just sit down and it's on the wall, when you walk past it every day, you start to see new things in it. This is why I often advise artists to print out their own work and then just let it sit with them for a while and slowly sort of sink in and develop. And you can do that with cheap prints up on the wall, and you can change them around every so often. Everything I've talked about before is because those are the questions I get asked all the time, like most often. Like, what paper should I use, what size should I print at, and so on. But I don't want anyone to think that that's all too much and they can't do it. A sheet of paper stuck up on the wall that lets you connect with the art is just as important and just as valid. I hope this has helped you. Like and subscribe, all that stuff, but probably more helpful to me perhaps is if you see someone asking about how to print their artwork, and if this was useful to you, then point them to this video, and that would be really great. I will see you in the next video. Goodbye. That doesn't work. I've yet to get one of those to work. Okay, bye.